Hi there, what's the difference between these two photos? Well, the difference is that one is vignetted while the other one is not. And that's what we're going to talk about in today's video, vignetting. We will address a few common issues that I see in people's photos with regards to vignetting and also how to fix these. So now I would say, let's get into the video. All right, let's get into vignetting mistake number one. And that vignetting mistake is to use the vignetting slider in the effects panel. So you find it under the effects panel, and as you toggle this on and off, you can see how it applies a vignette throughout your photo. Looks nice at first glance, but the problem is that you have very limited flexibility to adjust the vignette, to move it around in your frame, to remove specific areas from your vignette that you do not want to have affected by your vignette, and I'm going to show you how to fix this issue. So how are we going to fix this issue? Well, we're going to completely disregard the vignetting slider in the effects panel, and we will move immediately into the masking section. And here we're going to create a radial gradient that we're going to draw from the middle of your frame toward the edges. Then in a second step, we're going to invert this mask. Here we go. So now it's only affecting the edges of the frame. For now, this looks very similar to what we have done before using the vignetting slider. And now we're going to draw the actual vignette. So we're going to darken these corners. So everything that's affected by this mask will now be darkened. Here we go. But now that we have darkened the corners, we actually have a few limitations that we need to bear in mind. Most notably that here, for instance, the sky is also being affected by this vignette, which we do not want. Why? Because we have the sun in the frame, and by definition, the sun is arguably the brightest light source you have. And I think darkening it down just looks very unnatural. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna remove the sky from this mask by hitting the subtract button of our mask. Then we select the sky. Here we go. And as you can see now, these dark edges in the sky have been removed. And there is also a second thing that I would remove from this mask, which is that these bokeh blobs on the right hand side of the frame, I want them to stand out a little bit more, to bring some additional mood into this photo. And since the original vignette, we've actually darkened them quite a lot here in the before and after comparison. And now as we subtract them from our mask, we just paint the brush. I usually leave it at like density of 85%. And now we're just gonna paint over these bokeh blobs, and as you can see, we managed to bring them out really nicely. And now the viewer is actually going to be less distracted by this bottom part because we have darkened it, and the viewer's eye will immediately be drawn toward the center of this photo. Let's move over to mistake number two, which is to disregard where the light in your photo is coming from when applying your vignette. And here we're going to take the example from the introduction. So as we draw our vignette, so we again are going to draw a custom vignette, we're going to place a radial gradient, we're going to drag it out from the center toward the edges of the frame, and we're going to invert this mask so that it's only affecting the edges of the frame. And now, as before, we're going to darken these corners, so this is what the vignette is going to look like. But there is one problem if we just generically apply this vignette to all our photos, which is that we disregard where the light is coming from. And in the case of this photo, the light is actually coming from the left-hand side of the photo. So in other words, the left-hand side of the photo should logically be brighter than the middle or the right-hand side of the photo. And if we just think how the light is logically spread out into our scene, usually it is the case that something that's closer to the main light source, in this case the sun, it's also going to be brighter because it's going to be more affected by the sun than things that are a little bit further away, like for instance the tree on the right-hand side of this image. So in other words, we need to take that into consideration when we apply our vignette. So what we're going to do here is actually we're going to drag this vignette to the left-hand side in order to prevent that the left-hand side of your photo is darkened to the same amount than the right-hand side, given that the light is actually coming from the left-hand side of the frame. So what we're going to do, we toggle it or we drag it to the left-hand side of your photo, and since we can just flexibly adjust what is affected by this mask, we can actually also just drag it out a little bit more. So now we can really nicely see that it looks like the light is coming from the left-hand side, moving laterally into your scene. So if we toggle on and off this mask, you can see that it looks significantly better now that we have applied our vignette. But there is a few fixes that we will have to apply to this mask too, because the light is coming from the side, so we want to have the parts that are actually hit by the light to also be bright. In other words, if we have a look at the foreground here, for instance, we can see that these bushes in the foreground are also hit by the light. So in other words, we want to make sure that they're not affected by the vignette, because as of now, they are very much affected by the vignette. So we use again a brush and we paint over this area here, making sure that it's nice and bright because it's hit by the sun. And the reason why we brighten up this part is not to introduce a distraction, but to emphasize the depth in our scene. Because we have this dark part here at the very bottom, then we have this bright part that's hit by the sun, then we have a dark part again in the middle of the scene, finally we have the subject, and again a relatively dark sky. So in other words, we really add an additional layer and we emphasize an additional layer by brightening these foreground bushes. The next thing we're going to do is to have a look at the sky, because in my opinion the sky looks a little bit too dramatic as of now. It looks very nice, but I would actually do a separate adjustment to the sky. So what we're going to do is that I'm going to remove it from our mask by removing, well, select sky. Here we go, now we've removed it. So we're going to create a separate mask that's just affecting the sky. So this time we're not going to choose a radial gradient, but a linear gradient that we're going to drag from the top of your photo to the bottom of the sky. And now in order to make sure that the mask is only going to affect the sky, we're actually going to intersect our new mask with our sky so that it doesn't affect, for instance, the trees or the hills in the background. And now we're going to darken this part of the image too, so that we're gonna have a darker top and a brighter bottom of the sky, because this is where the light is like hitting the scene. Additionally, I would also probably just draw this linear gradient a little bit more sideways, if that makes sense, because the light is usually like hitting from a diagonal angle. So it makes sense that the top right corner of the image is gonna be affected more by the darkness than the left-hand corner. All right, let's move to the final mistake that I see people do, which is to apply too much vignetting to their photos. So how are we going to make sure that we're not going to use excessive masking in our photo? Well, we're going to create a radial gradient again. We're going to invert it, and we're just going to apply our settings. First of all, subtly, that's the first step. So subtle adjustments. So we're just going to decrease it by half a stop in this case, for instance. And now in the second step, we will toggle on and off this mask to see how much we have actually affected the scene. So this is the before and this is the after. So this was very subtle, and we can actually decrease the exposure quite a bit more. So now we had -2 stops, and again we toggle on and off this mask. So this is the before and this is the after. And I think this looks already fairly good. I would still argue that these lanterns, they should probably be brighter, because I mean they are lights in the end. So we're actually just going to paint those out of our photo. Here we go. So that they're nice and bright, because they should not be affected too much by the mask. And now in a third step, you should take some distance. Just get yourself a coffee, go for a walk, just let the edit be for a while. And that's what I do to all my edits. I usually just let them be for a day or even 2, and then I revisit the photo and see whether I might have excessively applied my vignette. So revisit your photo 15 minutes after you've done your edit, or even an hour after you've done your edit, or even a day after you've done your edit, and then revisit the photo and have a look again at the adjustments you've made and whether you still like them. And that's usually how I know that I have not excessively applied my vignette to the scene. I hope this little vignetting tutorial was useful to you. That was it for today's video. Thanks so much for tuning in today, and I hopefully see you in next week's video. Bye.